Have you ever looked at a photograph of yourself and thought, this doesn't look like me? Not because you look bad, but because something feels missing, something real. Now imagine going to a photographer who decides that your face is completely wrong and must be fixed piece by piece. Your eyes are adjusted, your ears are removed, and slowly you disappear. Your mouth is also corrected. This is the heart of today's lesson. With the Photographer by Stephen Leacock, a humorous yet deeply meaningful satire that questions society's obsession with perfection and reminds us of the value of being authentic. Stephen Leacock was a famous Canadian writer, teacher, and humorist. He lived in the late 19th century and early 20th century, and he is considered one of the greatest writers of light humor in English literature. Leacock's humor is not empty laughter. He uses comedy as a tool to expose human foolishness, social pretensions, and emotional blindness. His writing style is simple, observational, ironical, and deeply human. In this lesson, the narrator wants a photograph, something ordinary and harmless. But the photographer treats the task as a scientific experiment rather than an artistic act. What begins as a simple visit slowly turns into an emotional and psychological struggle. The story is humorous on the surface but serious underneath. Let us get to know the characters. There are only two main characters in this story, yet they represent two opposing worldviews. The narrator. The narrator is an ordinary man. He knows his face is imperfect. He does not claim to be handsome. Yet he has lived with his face for 40 years and learned to accept it. He represents natural identity, emotional sensitivity, self-acceptance, and human dignity. His pain grows silently throughout the story until it finally explodes in the climax. Second character, the photographer. The photographer is cold, professional, and mechanical. He looks at faces not as expressions of identity but as problems to be corrected. He represents artificial standards of beauty, society's obsession with perfection, emotional insensitivity, dehumanization. To him, improvement matters more than truth. Now, let us begin with our story. The story begins with the narrator entering the photographer's studio. The photographer shows no enthusiasm. He asks the narrator to sit and wait. The narrator waits for an entire hour reading outdated magazines. This waiting itself symbolizes how society makes individuals feel insignificant. When the narrator is finally called in, he is placed under harsh light, examined like an object. The photographer reacts with disappointment. He criticizes the narrator's face openly. He twists the narrator's head, adjusts his posture, controls his breathing, and orders him to reshape himself physically. Each instruction reduces the narrator's humanity. At one point, the narrator finally speaks up. He defends his face, saying it is his own, the only one he has ever had. This moment is crucial. It is the moment of self-assertion. But ironically, this moment of emotional resistance is exactly when the photographer snaps the photograph. Later, when the narrator returns to see the picture, he is shocked. The photograph does not resemble him. His eyes have been retouched, his eyebrows removed, his mouth adjusted, his ears scheduled for removal. The photographer proudly explains how modern processes can eliminate flaws. But what he calls improvement is actually erasure. The narrator finally breaks down emotionally. He explains that he wanted a photograph that would look like him, something his friends could remember after his death. Instead, he has been given a polished lie. His speech is powerful, filled with sarcasm and pain. This is where the humor fades and the truth becomes clear. Perfection has replaced humanity. Now, children, let us get to know the themes of this lesson. First, artificial perfection. The story criticizes the idea that flaws must be removed at all costs. Second, loss of identity. By altering physical features, the photographer destroys the narrator's identity. Third, emotional insensitivity. The photographer never notices the narrator's pain. Fourth, modern relevance. Long before filters and photo editing apps, Leacock predicted image obsession with culture. Let me conclude here, children. With the photographer teaches us that truth is more valuable than perfection. Stephen Leacock reminds us that when we try to correct everything, we may destroy what truly matters. A photograph should capture a person, not replace them. Authenticity is not a flaw, it is the soul of identity. So, the next time you look at a photograph or judge a face or edit an image, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, am I looking for perfection or am I looking at a person? If you found this explanation helpful, like, share and subscribe to the channel because literature doesn't just teach language, it teaches humanity.